Captain Midnight.
So I want to make one thing perfectly clear right off the bat. This is not a review of Jessica Jones Season 2, which was just released by Netflix. This video isn't about one single season of TV at all, actually. It's about the way that Netflix, now one of the largest players in all of entertainment, creates their television shows, and the problems I have with it. And to be clear, I like a lot of Netflix shows, including Jessica Jones. But the more of them I watch, the more I see similar problems cropping up. And nothing is a better example of these recurring Netflix problems than their Marvel superhero shows. Before I get into those though, let me take a step back. Back to 2004 actually. The year Lost blew my 6th grade mind. Lost was the first TV show I'd ever seen that was almost completely serialized. Each episode continued the story from the last, while the show developed this massive, complex mythology. Before Lost, the shows I watched were things like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, in which most episodes stood totally alone from the rest, or Spider-Man the Animated Series, where there was some serialization, but mostly only in the form of multi-part episodes. This wasn't the case with Lost, and I was hooked. Big time. I remember wishing that every show on TV was more like it. Just a ton of continuing stories, none of this single episode standalone crap. And in a twist straight out of a great standalone episode of The Twilight Zone, I got my wish. And it wasn't all that I'd hoped it would be. These days, serialized TV hasn't just become the norm on cable and streaming services, they've become a business model. Netflix goes out of their way to make sure their shows feel like, as many TV showrunners have said, one 13-hour movie. They depend on the viewer wanting to know what happens next enough to stick around and prolong that binge just 1 hour longer. And sometimes this works great for shows. Orange is the New Black does really well in this format, and it's hard to picture a version of that show with standalone episodes. The problem is, Netflix treats almost every show like this. Just like back in the 70s and 80s, when networks wanted every show to be standalone. Some stories just aren't suited for that format. Take the first season of Jessica Jones, one of my favorite of the Netflix Marvel shows. It had a great lead, a great villain, and a lot of great moments, but well, to put it simply, I don't think they had enough story to fill 13 hours of TV. And this becomes very clear in the low point of the first season, episode 10, titled AKA 1000 Cuts. In it, Jessica Jones' neighbors form an angry mob that ends up freeing Kilgrave, the villain, and knocking Jessica unconscious. And like, seriously? That was a plot development so forced that you could almost hear the writer straining for material through the screen. And even though the show had a fairly satisfying season finale, it was hard to shake the feeling that it had been dragged on for far longer than it should have. And this is a common feeling I have with Netflix shows, whether they be ones I enjoy like Jessica Jones, Daredevil, and Luke Cage, or ones I'm not so into like Iron Fist or The Defenders. They all feel like they're trying to expand 8 hours of material or so into 13 hours. But here's the thing, 13-hour movies don't exist for a reason. I like long, complex narratives a lot, but I also value the idea of the episode. An episode of TV can, and usually should be, satisfying in and of itself. It should try to give you a full experience, even if that's within the context of a larger narrative. Remember that episode of Breaking Bad where Walt and the gang try to rob a train? That's a prime example of what I mean. Breaking Bad was a highly serialized show, but it also understood the value of making sure that its episodes were still entertaining hours of TV by themselves. You could watch that episode of Breaking Bad having not seen a single other one, and enjoy it as a great piece of acting, directing, and writing. But it works even better if you've seen these characters change and develop over 5 seasons. And in my opinion, that's the type of episode that serialized TV shows should aspire to make. And the most frustrating thing about the Netflix Marvel shows is they don't have to be like this. I mean, Jessica Jones is a PI. Those were beloved by old network TV for a reason. They create a great excuse for a new story to walk through the lead's door every week. The original Jessica Jones comic took great advantage of this, with its combination of single-issue cases and cases that would last much longer. I just wish Netflix allowed the TV version of Jessica to follow suit. This isn't to say that I think Netflix shows should be completely standalone, like old episodes of The A-Team or something, where episodes have no connection to each other at all. I think that model definitely has its own issues. and it's really hard to create rich, well-developed characters if they exist in a bubble like that. But Jessica Jones could blend these two formats together really well if they wanted to. Just look at another PI show, Veronica Mars. The first season of that show is one of the best structured seasons of television I've ever seen. It has a larger, season-long story arc about getting to the bottom of her best friend's murder, but it's also packed with standalone episodes. And the standalone episodes aren't just filler. They're really important in filling out the world of the show and developing its supporting cast. And unlike something like The X-Files, where the so-called important mythology episodes are very separate from the Monster of the Week ones, you never really know when one of Veronica's smaller cases will also turn out to be really important to the season's overall story. So I would love to see Jessica Jones do more Case of the Week stories. In fact, I think it's almost a necessity. The first season felt like it had such a narrow focus on just Jessica and Kilgrave that a lot of its secondary characters were relegated to pretty thankless roles. Or they just got involved in some really contrived situations to further the plot, like the one I mentioned earlier. Right now, Netflix is busy working on a TV show based on The Witcher, and the showrunner of that show mentioned turning in the pilot script, which they said was trying to squeeze 2 hours of excitement into 1 hour. And hey, I haven't read the script, maybe they were right to object to that. But I do know that most of Netflix shows have the exact opposite problem, squeezing maybe 35 minutes of excitement into an hour. And I think that might be the way Netflix likes it, since it keeps viewers waiting for the payoff. The end of an episode almost never gives the viewers a feeling of satisfaction, that you've sat down and watched an hour of well-told story. At their worst, Netflix shows are kind of the hamster water bottles of TV, giving you just enough to want to keep going. That might sound overly harsh, and maybe it is. But after a few years of these Netflix Marvel shows, I've gotten pretty frustrated, because they very literally have the blueprint right in front of them to make sure they have enough material to pack in 13 great episodes. It's right there in comic book form, where there's countless stories, both standalone and overarching, to choose from. But what we're given instead is a lot of well-produced shows with good casts and likable leads that start well and end well, but get very, very flabby around the middle of the season. I'm worried that this is exactly how Netflix wants their shows to be made, and if that's the case, I'm just not sure they're the best home for these characters. Because almost all of these shows, with one big exception, are on the verge of being great TV. And I think all it would take is including a few smaller stories in among the big season-long ones. I really hope Netflix figures this out soon, and allows Jessica Jones and the rest of the Defenders to start living up to their potential. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought of Season 2 of Jessica Jones. I know I'll be checking it out pretty soon. Oh, also, if you haven't seen it yet, I did a video collaborating with NerdSync, so definitely be sure to check that out. It's about a few Black Panther sequel ideas, and I will see you next week.